The desert night was cold, colder than any human would have imagined, even those who had studied the strange, high-altitude plains of Zephyra. The sand seemed to shimmer, not with heat, but with the deceptive chill of a world so far from Earth that only a handful of humans had ever felt its sands underfoot. In the sky above, a patchwork of alien stars sparkled, oddly close to one another. This was a world of extremes, a place where no middle ground could survive. A thin form lay sprawled across the cold sand, motionless, half buried beneath an unusually heavy dusting of white powder, the desert's only attempt at concealing her alien vulnerability. She was alone, exposed, her skin a luminous pale blue, seemed almost as stark as the sands themselves. The vast silence of the desert seemed to recognize her presence and hold its breath. The first human to see her was Dr. Sam Delaney, a field scientist on his second week of fieldwork with a limited contingent of Marines on patrol. Delaney hadn't expected much from his assignment, even less from the quiet planet Zephyra. But as he stood on a ridge, gaze tracing over the untouched desert dunes, he felt the universe shift. He hadn't expected her, no one had. But there she was, the sight almost surreal against the sand and sky, like a mirage born from the whispered secrets of interstellar dreams. Delaney froze, his mind caught in a cascade of thoughts that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity and everything to do with raw, immediate awe. "Lieutenant Gresham, come in," he murmured into his radio, voice barely concealing the trembling shock. "I've found something." Static crackled in his earpiece, and after a pause, a voice replied. "What is it, Delaney?" "Another sand fox." "No," he replied. "Not this time. I think you should see it for yourself." The sky began to lighten just enough for shapes to emerge on the horizon. Delaney moved forward carefully, feeling the weight of each step in the shifting sands, eyes locked on the prone figure. As he closed the distance, the details sharpened. Her skin seemed flawless, untouched by the brutal elements. Her silver hair spread out around her head like a halo, her face serene as though she were simply sleeping. She was undeniably alien, her features sharper, her limbs slightly more elongated than any human, her form impossibly delicate. Yet, her vulnerability was painfully clear, her body motionless, bare to the cruel desert. The team arrived moments later, Lieutenant Gresham leading the way, with his harsh military bearing softening as he took in the scene. He looked at Delaney, eyebrows raised, his usual skepticism replaced by a hesitant awe. "Is she alive?" Gresham asked, his voice breaking through the reverent silence. "Who or what is she?" Delaney knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly over her form, afraid to touch, to disturb whatever peace she might have left. He leaned closer, studying her chest for any signs of breath, his heartbeat matching the rapid ticking of his wrist communicator. "She's breathing," he confirmed quietly. "Barely." Gresham's eyes hardened. "We need to get her out of here. If anyone from the colony sees her." "She's vulnerable," Delaney interrupted, his voice edged with a rare defiance. "We can't just—" "I understand." Gresham placed a hand on Delaney's shoulder. "But we don't know what she is, what risk she brings with her." His eyes softened just slightly. "But we won't leave her here." "I'm no monster, Doctor." With careful coordination, the team lifted the alien woman, covering her with Delaney's field coat. She stirred slightly, a soft murmur escaping her lips, a sound almost musical, haunting. Delaney felt his heart clench, a mix of scientific fascination and something deeper, something primal. He felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. As they began their journey back to the small outpost, Delaney's mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why had she been abandoned, and by whom? And why here in the deadliest, most remote reaches of the desert, exposed and unprotected? The team moved in silence, the desert sands swallowing their footsteps. Delaney could see Gresham's soldiers exchanging uneasy glances, their war-hardened faces hiding nothing of their discomfort. This mission had just turned from a simple patrol into something far stranger and far more dangerous. When they reached the outpost, Delaney and Gresham entered the small, dimly lit medical bay, laying her gently on the cot. Delaney monitored her vitals as best he could with his limited equipment, noting the unusual rhythms of her alien physiology. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse faint but steady. Hours passed. Delaney found himself sitting beside her, captivated by her every slight movement, her every faint breath. She was a puzzle, an enigma that defied every expectation. He felt his mind spinning with possibilities, theories blooming and collapsing in the same instant. Then, as dawn began to seep through the thin windows, her eyes opened. They were deep, unfathomably so, a color shifting between emerald and amethyst, as though they contained entire galaxies within their depths. She looked at him, her gaze sharp and assessing, and Delaney felt himself caught in her gaze, as if her very being demanded recognition, demanded understanding. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, the air between them charged with an indefinable energy. "Where?" she murmured, her voice like a ripple of water through the quiet room. Delaney found himself leaning forward, his words almost catching in his throat. "You're safe. We found you in the desert. My name is Delaney. I'm here to help." She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words, measuring his intentions. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Delaney," she repeated, her accent curling around the syllables in a way that was both foreign and familiar. "My name is Loren." The name struck him like a physical blow, carrying with it a weight he could not define. This was no ordinary alien, no stray life form from a distant system. There was purpose in her voice, a sense of destiny woven into the very sound of her name. Loren. He felt it resonate within him, as though the universe itself had whispered it to him long before this moment. He hesitated, glancing at her with a cautious empathy. "Loren, do you know how you got here?" She closed her eyes, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "I was left. Abandoned." The words were simple, but her voice held layers of emotion that no human language could fully capture. "It is my punishment." Delaney's heart tightened. Punishment? For what? Her gaze dropped, and she seemed to retreat into herself, the weight of her suffering more than any words could convey. But her silence told him enough. She was alone, cast away from whatever people or purpose she had once belonged to. The desert had claimed her, but Delaney could see that she bore a strength, a resilience, that seemed to defy the cruelty of her circumstances. Gresham entered quietly, his gaze flicking between Delaney and Loren, taking in the scene with a mixture of suspicion and unspoken sympathy. Loren's head lifted, her gaze darting between the two men, a glint of fear sparking in her otherwise unreadable eyes. In that instant, Delaney made a decision that would change the course of his life. He could feel the weight of it settle within him, the call to protect, to safeguard the life that fate had placed into his hands. The outpost's walls seemed to hum in the pre-dawn silence, every subtle creak and groan amplified in Delaney's heightened senses. He had hardly slept, his mind caught between the strange, almost magical arrival of Loren and the looming presence of military oversight. Delaney had experienced his share of alien encounters, but Loren was different. Something in the way she carried herself, even unconscious, had a gravity that drew everyone near her into a quiet orbit. Outside, Gresham's soldiers were already moving with the well-oiled efficiency of a unit trained to handle anything. Anything except, perhaps, a mysterious alien woman who had appeared out of nowhere. Delaney could see the unease etched into their faces as they cast furtive glances toward the medical bay, where Loren lay recovering. Inside, Loren stirred, and Delaney moved to her side. She was awake, but silent, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the sterile walls of the outpost. He sensed a mix of sadness and resolve in her eyes, as if she knew exactly where she was, but had yet to decide if she wanted to stay. "We've called for assistance," he said softly, unsure if the words offered comfort or only deepened her dread. Her gaze snapped to him, sharp and alert. "Assistance," she echoed, her voice laden with a heavy, unfamiliar accent. "For me, or to contain me?" Delaney hesitated, caught off guard by her perceptiveness. "They'll have questions. I won't lie about that." A flicker of disappointment crossed her face, quickly masked by an expression of stoic acceptance. "I understand your ways, Dr. Delaney. Your kind fears what they do not understand." He found himself momentarily speechless, her words striking him as if spoken from centuries of wisdom rather than a being who had only just arrived in their midst. He could see now that she was no mere survivor. She carried a quiet power, a knowing that both fascinated and unsettled him. "How much do you understand of us?" he asked, probing gently. She looked away, fingers tracing the edge of the cot. "Enough. Humans have long left their mark across the galaxies." She paused, as though considering her next words carefully. "Your world of war, of conquest. Even as I was cast away, I knew there was risk here. But there is also something remarkable about you." Delaney's heart quickened. "And what is that?" She met his gaze, eyes glimmering with a strange warmth. "Resilience. A defiance that refuses to be silenced. Even when faced with the unknown." Her voice softened. "It's a quality I have rarely encountered." Before he could reply, the sharp sound of boots echoed down the corridor. Gresham entered, his face unreadable as he nodded curtly to Delaney, then addressed Loren. "There's a transport arriving soon," he said. "They'll be taking you for further questioning." Loren's expression didn't change, but Delaney caught the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched the edge of the cot. She gave a faint nod, her face an unreadable mask of resignation. "I understand." Her voice held no fear, only a grim acceptance that cut into Delaney like a blade. He could see the shift in her, the way her confidence waned under the looming uncertainty of her future. As Gresham turned to leave, Loren spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Would you leave me with Delaney a moment longer?" Gresham's eyes flicked to Delaney, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Gresham nodded curtly. 5 minutes, he muttered, stepping out and closing the door behind him. Once they were alone, Loren looked at Delaney, her gaze intense, as though searching his very soul. "I cannot remain here," she said quietly. Delaney's heart pounded. "They're not open to letting you go, if that's what you mean." Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "I am no prisoner, Doctor. I have only been exiled." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are things your people cannot understand. Forces at play that would endanger not just me, but your entire colony." A cold sense of dread washed over him. "What are you saying?" "I was cast out not because of any crime," she continued, her tone low and fierce, "but because I hold knowledge. Knowledge that threatens those in power." Delaney's mind spun, trying to grasp the enormity of her words. "What kind of knowledge?" She hesitated, and for the first time, he saw vulnerability in her eyes. "My people, they do not simply exile those they fear. They erase them. I am the only one who knows what I know." Her gaze grew distant, haunted. "There are secrets that could unravel galaxies, Dr. Delaney. Secrets that no one is meant to carry alone." A shiver ran down his spine. "And they fear you'll share them with us?" "They fear much more than that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They fear I will remind others that we have choices, that even the most powerful empires can fall." As her words sank in, Delaney felt a shift within himself. He had come to this world in search of knowledge, but what he had found was a truth so profound it defied his understanding. He could sense the weight of her burden, the isolation she endured to protect what she knew. The door opened abruptly, and Gresham's stern face appeared. "Time's up." Delaney turned to him, desperation tightening his voice. "Gresham, you don't understand. She's not just a castaway. She's carrying something that could change everything." Gresham's gaze hardened. "You're overstepping, Delaney." Our orders are clear. Delaney opened his mouth to argue, but a soft touch on his arm silenced him. Loren shook her head, her expression serene. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm, almost reassuring. "I know your intentions are good, Doctor. But this is not your battle." Delaney watched, helpless, as Gresham's soldiers entered, securing her in gentle but firm grips, leading her out of the room. She didn't resist, her gaze remaining forward, fixed on some distant horizon only she could see. As they took her away, Delaney felt a wave of frustration, an overwhelming sense of loss. He could still feel the touch of her hand on his arm, the weight of her unspoken words pressing against his heart. He knew he couldn't let it end here. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever knowledge her people wanted hidden, he felt an undeniable pull, a sense of responsibility that transcended duty. He waited until the outpost returned to its usual rhythms, the soldiers settling into routine, and Gresham preoccupied with logistics. Then, under the cover of darkness, he slipped into the communication room and began a secure message. "Dr. Elliot, this is Delaney. I need immediate extraction assistance. There's an urgent complication." He felt a surge of adrenaline as he transmitted the message. There was no turning back now. He had crossed a line, defied orders he knew he was supposed to follow. But as he looked out into the dark expanse of desert, he knew one thing for certain. Loren was right. This was a battle he could no longer ignore. The sun rose slowly, casting a cold light across the outpost, and Delaney could feel the tension simmering in the air as he waited. Hours passed, each one filled with the prickling anticipation of impending conflict. He had no way of knowing if his message had been received, much less answered. Then, at last, a rumble of engines broke the morning silence. Delaney's heart leaped as he recognized the sleek lines of a covert transport vessel descending from the skies above, its black hull glinting in the early light. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the landing pad, skirting the edges of the outpost to avoid the watchful eyes of Gresham's men. His contact, a figure shrouded in a dark, utilitarian suit, emerged from the ship, scanning the surroundings before giving him a curt nod. "I received your message, Delaney," the figure said, voice muffled by a helmet. "Is she secure?" Delaney swallowed, feeling the weight of his decision settle heavily on him. "Not yet. She's being held under close watch." The figure's gaze shifted toward the outpost, assessing. "Then let's change that." In swift, precise motions, they formulated a plan. Delaney would distract Gresham and his men, providing just enough of a window for the extraction team to infiltrate and retrieve Loren. It was a risky move, but he knew it was the only way. He steeled himself, striding back into the outpost with a feigned air of calm. He found Gresham in the command room, studying a map of the region, oblivious to the unfolding plan around him. "Gresham," Delaney said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We need to talk about Loren." Gresham glanced up, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Again with this, Delaney? What's done is done. She'll be gone by tomorrow." Delaney leaned forward, his expression tense. "You don't understand. We're sitting on a powder keg. She holds information that could put us all at risk." Gresham rolled his eyes. "Save the drama, Doctor." Gresham barely had time to finish his sentence before a loud alarm blared through the outpost. A crackling voice came over the intercom, strained with urgency. "Unknown vessel detected. Breach in perimeter defenses." Gresham's face twisted in frustration. He turned to Delaney, suspicion gleaming in his eyes. "You know something about this, don't you?" But Delaney didn't answer. His mind was racing, caught between fear and the reckless surge of hope. The extraction had begun. He turned and bolted, ignoring Gresham's barked commands. Down the corridor, he heard the distinct clatter of boots behind him as Gresham's soldiers gave chase. He cut left, then right, weaving through the narrow corridors toward the holding area where Loren was kept. He could feel the thrum of adrenaline pulsing through his veins, urging him forward. Just as he rounded the last corner, he spotted two guards stationed outside her cell, weapons drawn, their gazes darting nervously toward the source of the alarm. "Stand down," Delaney shouted, his voice echoing through the hallway. The guards glanced at each other, uncertain, and in that moment of hesitation, Delaney seized his chance. He lunged forward, grabbing one of their weapons, twisting it out of his grip before he could react. With a quick, disorienting move, he aimed the weapon at the second guard, whose eyes widened in surprise. "Just move," Delaney said, his voice steady, each word weighed with urgency. The guard held up his hands, stepping back, and Delaney pushed past him, entering the cell. Loren was standing, a calm intensity in her gaze. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You came back," she murmured, her voice like a whisper through the chaos. "Of course," he said, handing her the weapon. "But we don't have much time." They moved quickly, slipping out of the cell and down the dim corridor. Behind them, the sound of shouting and clattering weapons grew louder, the soldiers scrambling in confusion as they tried to locate the breach. Delaney led Loren through a side door, the familiar metal hiss echoing in his ears as it slid shut behind them. Just ahead, the extraction team was waiting, their black-clad forms half hidden in the desert shadows. One of the operatives stepped forward, his helmet glinting under the harsh overhead lights. "Dr. Delaney, Loren, we're here to get you out of this mess. We have a secure route to the vessel." Loren gave a nod of acknowledgement, her eyes scanning the extraction team. And for the first time since Delaney had met her, he saw a flicker of relief. Without another word, they fell into formation, moving swiftly across the outpost's grounds, weaving between storage units and transport vehicles to avoid the roving patrols. Just as they reached the perimeter fence, a sharp voice called out, "Stop right there." Delaney turned, heart pounding as he recognized Gresham standing in the distance, flanked by a squad of soldiers. His eyes burned with betrayal, fury blazing across his features. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Delaney. "Don't make this any harder, Doctor," Gresham warned. "Step away from her. Now." Delaney's heart thundered as he met Gresham's gaze. He could see the conflict in his eyes, the unwillingness to shoot a man he had worked alongside for so many years. But Delaney knew that duty would ultimately drive Gresham's hand. "I can't do that," Delaney replied, his voice calm. "She doesn't belong here, Gresham. This isn't justice. This is fear." Gresham's face twisted with rage. "You're compromising our entire mission. You have no idea what you're dealing with. She's a threat to everything we stand for." Delaney took a step forward, holding his hands out to show he meant no harm. "Listen to me. She isn't the threat. It's the secrets that those in power want buried. We can't keep blindly following orders, not when they go against everything we claim to stand for." Gresham's gaze faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the rigid mask of duty. He raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. Loren moved then, swift as a shadow. Before Delaney could react, she stepped forward, her arm raised in a smooth, deliberate motion. A strange, almost invisible ripple of energy radiated from her hand, shimmering like heat waves in the air. Gresham and his soldiers froze, their faces slack, expressions of shock etched into their features as the energy field enveloped them. "They won't be harmed," she whispered to Delaney, her voice low. "But we need to go, now." With one last glance at the immobilized soldiers, Delaney turned and followed Loren through the perimeter gate, where the extraction team waited. They moved quickly, sprinting across the open sand toward the sleek, dark vessel waiting for them, its engines thrumming softly. As they climbed aboard, the doors sealed behind them, and the ship lifted off, rising smoothly into the air, carrying them away from the outpost and into the vast expanse of desert beyond. Inside the ship, Loren leaned against the wall, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of her journey had finally caught up with her. Delaney sat across from her, his mind racing with questions, but he held them back, sensing her exhaustion. "Thank you," she murmured after a long silence, her gaze fixed on the floor. You didn't have to do this. Delaney shook his head, his voice soft but resolute. I couldn't just stand by. Not when I knew they would destroy you. Loren looked up, her eyes meeting his, and he saw a flicker of something he hadn't noticed before, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something more vulnerable. In my world, sacrifice is seen as weakness. But you risked everything. For someone you barely know. It wasn't a risk, Delaney replied, feeling the truth of his words settle into his bones. It was the right thing to do. As they sat in silence, the hum of the ship filling the space between them, Delaney realized just how profoundly his life had changed. He had crossed a line, left behind the safety of his position, his career, even his world, for a cause he barely understood. But he knew, deep down, that he had found something worth fighting for. One of the operatives approached, his helmet tucked under his arm. We're headed to the rendezvous point. From there, you'll have access to a safe haven. Somewhere they won't be able to trace you. Delaney nodded, glancing at Loren. And then? The operative's gaze shifted to Loren, his expression unreadable. That's up to her. Loren met his eyes, a strange intensity flashing in her gaze. I don't plan on hiding forever, she said, her voice steady. But I need time to understand, to prepare. Delaney felt a surge of determination. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone. She held his gaze, a quiet gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, Delaney, for everything. As the ship slipped through the dark skies, Delaney felt a sense of calm settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He had chosen the path he believed in, and he would follow it, no matter where it led. Inside the dimly lit cargo bay of the ship, Delaney watched as Loren sat in quiet contemplation, her gaze unfocused as though she was seeing something far beyond the cold steel walls. The extraction team moved with a silent efficiency, each member performing their tasks with the precision of seasoned operatives. The hum of the ship's engines created a steady background rhythm, a heartbeat of their escape. One of the operatives, a tall woman with close-cropped hair, approached Delaney. Dr. Delaney, she murmured, her eyes scanning him with a mix of caution and curiosity. Your extraction request didn't mention a priority subject of this nature. Who exactly is she? Delaney's gaze drifted toward Loren, his voice low as he replied. She's a defector, I think. She carries information that her people don't want us to have. The operative frowned, her gaze sharpening. So this wasn't just a humanitarian call. You know what this means? He hesitated. I know it means she's in danger. That's all I need to understand right now. Loren's head tilted slightly as if she heard their exchange, though she said nothing, her eyes tracing the sleek lines of the ship's interior. She finally spoke, her voice soft, resonant. Your world will be different because of what I hold. I cannot guarantee safety. Only that I'm here to share what I know. Whether you can handle it remains to be seen. The operative raised an eyebrow, eyeing Loren carefully before she moved away, evidently unsettled. Delaney watched her go, feeling the weight of what he had set in motion. In all his years as a scientist, he had always believed knowledge to be a path to progress. But Loren's guarded words suggested something far beyond human comprehension. Moments later, the ship jolted. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, tense and urgent. We've got company. Unidentified craft approaching at high velocity. Delaney's heart skipped a beat as he glanced toward Loren. Her expression remained calm, but he could see the shadows in her eyes deepen. It's them, she said quietly. They've come to take me back. The operative returned, her face grim as she addressed Delaney and Loren. We're initiating evasive maneuvers, but if they're after her, this could get ugly. Are they armed? Loren nodded, her voice steady. Their technology far surpasses anything you've encountered. If they engage, you won't stand a chance. But there is another way. The operative crossed her arms, skeptical. And what's that? Loren took a deep breath, glancing between Delaney and the operative. Allow me to communicate with them. I know their codes. I may be able to negotiate or at least stall them. The operative's eyes narrowed. You want us to trust that you won't betray us? Delaney stepped forward, his voice firm. She's here because she chose to be. If she wanted to go back, she would have let them take her in the desert. The operative studied Delaney's face, and then Loren's, before nodding reluctantly. Fine, but one wrong move, and I won't hesitate. The team led Loren to a small comm station, where she settled into the chair, her fingers hovering over the holographic controls. Her expression was one of intense concentration, her gaze steady as she activated the console. The screen flickered, then stabilized as she input a series of codes. After a few seconds, the image of a severe-looking alien appeared on the monitor, his features angular and sharp, his eyes gleaming with a cold authority. "Loren," he said, his tone laced with contempt. "You should have known better than to run." Her voice was calm, measured. "Commander, I have chosen my path. You may pursue me, but you will not erase what I know." The commander's lip curled in a sneer. "You think you can escape? Even now your location is triangulated. Surrender, and I may consider showing mercy." Loren's eyes narrowed, her tone turning steely. "I am beyond mercy, Commander. I possess knowledge that will shatter your empire's lies. If you silence me, you will only amplify the truth." The commander's expression darkened. "Then you leave me no choice." The screen went dark, and the ship's sensors began to wail as the hostile craft opened fire. The pilot cursed, jerking the controls as he struggled to evade the relentless assault. Explosions rocked the ship, the hull shuddering under the impact of high-energy blasts. Delaney gripped the edge of the console, his heart racing. "Is there anything we can do?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the alarms. Loren closed her eyes, her hands pressing against the sides of the console as though feeling for something unseen. "There is one option, but it will require trust. Complete trust." The operative gave her a wary look. "And why should we trust you?" "Because without me, you will not survive this," she replied, her gaze steady. "I can destabilize their weapons system for a short time, enough for you to escape, but only if I'm given access to your ship's primary energy core." The operative hesitated, glancing toward Delaney. He gave her a nod, his voice steady. "Let her try." Reluctantly, the operative led Loren to the engineering bay, where the hum of the ship's core pulsed in the enclosed space. Loren stood before it, her hands outstretched as she focused, her breathing deep and controlled. She murmured something under her breath in a language that sounded like music and metal, a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the ship itself. The lights flickered, dimming as the ship's systems adjusted to her commands. A subtle vibration ran through the deck, and then an invisible shockwave radiated outward, the pulse of energy cutting through the vacuum toward the pursuing craft. On the monitors, Delaney saw the hostile ship's lights flicker, its weapon system stalling as it veered off course, caught in the disorienting effects of Loren's disruption. The pilot seized the opportunity, steering the ship into a sharp ascent, breaking through the atmosphere and hurtling into the safety of deep space. In the engineering bay, Loren staggered, her skin paler than before, her breathing shallow. Delaney rushed to her side, steadying her as she leaned against him, her strength waning. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched into his features. She managed a faint smile. "For now, yes, but such an act has its cost." He frowned. "What kind of cost?" Her eyes darkened, and she looked away, avoiding his gaze. "The energy required to disable their systems, it weakens my own life force. I will need time to recover, but they won't stop, Delaney. They will return stronger." The operative approached, her face tense but respectful. "What you did bought us time. We're taking you to a secure location, somewhere off their radar. But we need to know what we're dealing with." Loren straightened, her expression resolute. "You are dealing with an empire that fears its own people. My knowledge threatens the foundation of their power. They built their control on lies, on the suppression of truths that, if known, would spark rebellion across worlds. Delaney's breath caught as he listened, realizing just how far-reaching her secrets might be. What kind of truths? She hesitated, as though deciding how much to reveal. The Council of Ascian governs through fear, spreading tales of a volatile galaxy where only they can maintain order. They hide the existence of worlds that thrive independently, races that have escaped their influence and live in peace. The Council has invested centuries in maintaining the illusion that it is indispensable. The operative exchanged a glance with Delaney, her expression grim. So if they lose control, their entire empire could collapse. Liren nodded. Exactly. And if that collapse begins, there will be chaos. Yes, but also freedom. Freedom for countless beings who live under the shadow of Ascian rule. Delaney felt a surge of purpose, a clarity he hadn't expected. Liren was more than an exile. She was a catalyst for change. And in that moment, he knew that his life, his goals as a scientist, had shifted irrevocably. The operative's gaze softened, her voice calm but resolute. Then we'll take you to our leaders, those who will know what to do with what you carry. But you must understand, Liren, this path isn't one you can abandon once it's begun. Liren met her gaze, her expression fierce. I am ready. I have spent my life hiding. It's time to end that. The ship sailed on through the vast expanse, leaving behind the hostile forces, the desert world, and the chains of exile that had bound Liren. But for Delaney, this was only the beginning, an unfolding truth that had already reshaped everything he thought he knew. And as the stars passed by, he could feel the pulse of something greater, a movement that was only just beginning to awaken. Tarek nodded. Then let's begin. He gestured toward a long, illuminated table where holograms of distant star systems flickered above its surface. Liren's gaze flickered to the images, her face tense as she recognized the mapped coordinates. This is the path we'll follow, Tarek said, pointing to a star system she recognized. If you're correct, we should find allies here, free worlds untouched by the Council's influence. Liren's eyes narrowed, her gaze distant as she considered the route. They won't trust you easily. They've guarded their independence fiercely, and any attempt to contact them could be seen as a threat. Tarek's lips curved in a faint smile. I understand their distrust, but we have resources they might find useful. And if they realize they're not alone, that others are willing to fight the Council's control, it might be enough. Liren glanced at Delaney, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a slight nod, his voice steady. It's worth the risk. If these free societies hold the knowledge you spoke of, it's our best chance. Tarek looked at the both of them, his expression hardening with determination. Then we'll make contact. Prepare yourselves. This mission is about to become much more than either of you imagined. As the meeting ended, Delaney lingered, his mind racing with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. He found himself drawn to the observation deck, where Liren stood alone, staring out into the endless darkness of space. She turned as he approached, her expression softening slightly. You risked everything to bring me here, she said, her voice a quiet murmur. Thank you. Delaney shrugged, though he felt the weight of her gratitude. I just did what I thought was right. It's you who carries the real burden. She studied him, a faint smile touching her lips. Perhaps. But there is strength in numbers. They stood in silence, watching as the stars drifted past, each one a silent witness to the galaxy's secrets. For a brief moment, Delaney felt a strange calm settle over him. He knew the road ahead would be perilous, filled with unknowns that might cost him everything. But as he stood beside Liren, he felt that, perhaps, there was a purpose in the risks they were taking. The soft hum of the engines began to intensify, and he knew their journey was about to begin in earnest. The stars outside the observation deck seemed to stretch endlessly, a reminder of the vast expanse they had yet to confront. But in the quiet of the ship, that vastness was no longer daunting. Delaney felt its pull, its purpose. and he felt ready. The ship's intercom crackled. Approaching contact zone, the pilot announced, his voice carrying a mix of tension and resolve. This was it. They were about to make contact with the first of the free societies Loren had described, a system of planets that had evaded the Council's control for centuries, fiercely independent and rumored to possess technologies and knowledge thought lost to the galaxy. Loren joined Delaney and Tarek at the helm. Her gaze focused on the display as a series of planets rotated in holographic display, each orbiting a dense red star. There was an elegance to the alignment of the worlds here, their orbits weaving in complex patterns, some so close they seemed on the verge of collision. Tarek's voice broke the silence. We'll make contact with their outer communication network and initiate a diplomatic signal. We come as allies, not conquerors. Loren nodded, her eyes intent. They'll respond quickly, but their first reaction will be suspicion. She looked at Delaney, her gaze carrying a silent plea. We have to make them understand this isn't just about liberation. It's about a future where control no longer dictates destiny. Tarek keyed in the codes, and a pulsing signal beamed out from the ship, amplified and encrypted, carrying Loren's words of peace and alliance. Silence filled the cockpit, each second stretching taut as they waited. Then, the console flickered to life. A voice filled the ship, soft but commanding, resonant and precise. You are trespassing within the sacred zones of the Fretani Alliance. State your purpose, or be removed from existence. Tarek held his breath, exchanging a quick glance with Delaney. Loren stepped forward, her voice strong. This is Loren, a former counselor of the Ashian Order, and I seek refuge. I come with knowledge that could end the Council's reign. We do not mean harm. We seek cooperation. A long pause followed, the seconds heavy with anticipation. Then the voice replied, calm and slightly curious. Knowledge that could end the reign of Ashian? Bold words even from an exile. If you wish for an audience, you will have to prove yourself worthy. The signal cut out abruptly, and Tarek frowned. Is that a good sign? They'll test us first, Loren replied, her expression calm but guarded. They need to know if we are as sincere as we say. Outside, 3 sleek, dark ships emerged from behind the closest planet. Their design was unfamiliar, each ship elongated and cloaked with layered armor that absorbed any light, making them appear as shadows against the stars. Tarek's hands flew over the controls, steadying the ship as the vessels formed a tight formation around them. He raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture, signaling that they posed no danger. Without warning, the lead ship transmitted a complex series of encrypted pulses. Delaney's fingers flew over the console, trying to decode the transmission, but it was Loren who moved forward with a calm certainty. It's a call and response sequence, she murmured, entering a string of codes she had memorized from her time within the Council's inner chambers. As she keyed in the last code, the lead ship's lights dimmed, and the transmission line reactivated. The voice returned, this time with a note of respect. You have passed the first test. Follow our lead, and prepare yourself. Our council does not welcome outsiders. Their ship moved in tandem with the Fretani vessels, slipping through the field of planets and descending toward the largest, a massive sphere dotted with lights. Cities were visible from orbit, spread across the surface in networks so organized they resembled neural pathways. The ship landed in a large docking bay, where a delegation awaited them. Fretani officials stood in flowing robes made from a material that seemed to ripple with its own light, their eyes assessing and distant, their faces framed by intricate headpieces. Loren and Delaney exited the ship, with Tarek and his team following closely. They were led through a series of winding corridors and into a chamber filled with ethereal, silvery light. The council stood before them, arranged in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable as they observed the newcomers. One of the council members, a tall figure with a face lined by age and wisdom, addressed Loren. We have heard tales of the council's oppression, but we have survived by avoiding their attention, by remaining hidden. Why would we risk everything to confront them now? Loren's voice was steady, unwavering. Because the Ashen Order is growing stronger. They seek to expand, and their eyes are turning to uncharted systems. Soon, there will be no safe places left. But with the knowledge I bring, you can help end their rule once and for all. We have the means to unite those under their control, to ignite a movement that the Council cannot silence. The Council members exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. One of them, a younger member with sharp features and a skeptical gaze, leaned forward. And if we refuse? If we decide that this fight is not ours? Delaney felt a chill at the question, but Loren's answer was calm, certain. Then you'll be signing away your independence, not just for yourselves, but for generations to come. The Council will reach you sooner or later. But if we act now, together we can change the course of history. The elder counselor nodded slowly, his eyes flickering with reluctant respect. We will consider your words. You will be granted provisional alliance. For now, you are welcome among us. Delaney felt a wave of relief as the Council concluded their session, the weight of their decision settling into the room. It was only the beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. In the days that followed, Loren worked closely with the Fretonese scientists and strategists, sharing her knowledge and unraveling the intricacies of the Ashen Order's control methods. Delaney assisted, his scientific background helping bridge the gaps between their technologies, piecing together the mosaic of possibilities that had once been hidden. Gradually, alliances began to form. Independent systems, long disconnected from one another, started to unite under a shared purpose. Messages spread across the galaxy, reaching worlds that had only ever heard rumors of rebellion. For the first time in centuries, a force capable of challenging the Council was beginning to rise. In the midst of this fervor, Delaney and Loren found themselves spending more time together, exchanging thoughts and plans in the late hours when the weight of their work seemed to press upon them. There was an understanding between them now, an unspoken bond that had grown stronger with each step of their shared purpose. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the Fretonese city, Loren spoke softly. I never thought I'd find allies. I had resigned myself to a life of exile, of isolation. But now she trailed off, her eyes reflecting the distant lights of the city. Delaney placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her presence. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Whatever comes, we're in this together. Loren's gaze softened, and she gave a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Delaney, for everything. In that moment, Delaney felt the full weight of their journey, the battles, the risks, the sacrifices. And he knew that, regardless of the outcome, they had already accomplished something extraordinary. They had sparked a movement, a shift in the galaxy's balance that would ripple far beyond the reaches of the Fretonese alliance. As the first light of dawn broke over the city, Delaney and Loren stood side by side, watching as the world they had dared to imagine began to take shape, a world that no longer belonged to one power, but to countless free minds ready to embrace their own futures. The galaxy would never be the same,